on the Information Highway. On Parks Plus. Parks Plus, Tuesdays at 5 on Channel 16.
Increases in the standard of living, along with advances in medical care and technology, have improved life expectancies dramatically, and many of us are living longer. Despite these advances, the relationship between age and disability is unmistakable. As people age, they're more likely to develop medical problems, physical or mental, that can limit their ability to perform normal daily activities. Consequently, a substantial number of elderly people suffer from some type of disability. These problems, in turn, can cause seniors to face difficulties staying in their current housing or obtaining new housing. I'm Maggie Linton, and on our program today, we'll discuss housing discrimination based upon disability, a particular problem for many seniors who don't realize the extent of protections and rights they are entitled to under fair housing laws. The Federal Fair Housing Act prohibits housing discrimination based upon race or color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, families with children, and disability, physical and mental. The Fairfax County Human Rights Ordinance also prohibits discrimination on the basis of elderliness and marital status. Today, our focus is on the section of fair housing law that covers the area of housing discrimination based on disability, both physical and mental, particularly as it relates to seniors and senior housing options. In the studio today, we have Dr. Harry Salinas, Commissioner with the Fairfax County Human Rights Commission, Annie Carroll, Division Director, Human Rights Division, and Patricia Stephen Fawcett, Housing Specialist with the Fairfax County Office of Human Rights and Equity Programs. They're joining us today to talk about fair housing law, in particular, protections afforded people with disabilities under the law, especially as they affect seniors. Harry, we're going to begin with you. What type of housing is covered under the Fair Housing Act?
There are some limited exceptions, but the Fair Housing Act covers most housing, including some single-family housing, most multi-unit or multi-housing, both rental and condos. Also, the senior housing, both public and private, are also covered. And a lot of people don't realize that retirement communities.
And what are the exceptions?
The exceptions are the owner-occupied housing with no more than 4 units, and some single-family housing with such as that are sold or rented without the use of a broker are exempt.
Annie, I understand that disability is one of the areas covered under housing law. Can you tell us more?
Yes. Under the Fair Housing Law, it's illegal to discriminate against people because they or someone they are associated with have a disability, physical or mental, or they have a record of having a disability, or they are regarded as having a disability. For example, if a person is elderly and they appear frail, they walk unsteadily, and the provider observes that and decide they don't want to rent to that applicant, that would be a violation of the law. If a person is already a tenant or is in a facility and the provider observes that person having someone run errands for them or assisting them in some way, they cannot refuse to renew that person's lease or renew that person's lease or ask them to leave because of that.
Pat, what types of protections are people with disabilities afforded under the Fair Housing Act?
The Fair Housing Act prohibits housing providers from discriminating against current residents, applicants, essentially treating disabled people worse than they treat non-disabled people. And in things like different rental fees, terms and conditions of their residency, sales prices, because someone is blind or uses a wheelchair or is otherwise disabled.
So it's fairness straight across the board.
Mm-hmm.
And can you talk further about what types of disabilities are protected under the Fair Housing Act, say in daily living activities?
Well, someone is protected under the Fair Housing Act if they're substantially limited by a mental or physical disability, and it substantially affects walking, talking, breathing, seeing, learning, performing manual tasks, taking care of themselves.
And even if they have someone coming in and providing for them, they still have to be protected under those laws?
Absolutely.
All right. Annie, are there other protections for persons covered under the Fair Housing Disability Law?
Yes. For example, if a person has a disability and they need a reasonable accommodation, the provider must provide that reasonable accommodation or a modification if it's necessary to allow that person the equal opportunity to have access to that housing. Now, the 7 fair housing accessibility requirements for multifamily dwellings are an accessible building entrance on an accessible route, accessible common and public use areas, usable doors, usable by a person in a wheelchair, accessible route into and through the dwelling unit, light switches, electrical outlets, thermostats, and other environmental controls in accessible locations, reinforced walls and bathrooms for later installation of grab bars, and usable kitchens and bathrooms.
What would be some of the things that have to be provided now that weren't provided, say, beforehand?
Well, for example, if they build an apartment complex, they must have, some of the apartments must have accessibility to people with disabilities, such as doors wide enough that the wheelchairs can go through, the doors having pressures set so that people with wheelchairs or have disabilities that reduces their strength be able to get in the doors, those types of things.
Or even like the buttons on the side that we see.
Yes, yes.
Also being able to get in like
yes,
that.
those types of things.
And how about with the, I think, bathrooms, someone being able to roll in with a wheelchair?
Yes, they must be able to roll into the bathroom with wheelchairs, space enough to get to the toilets, that type of thing. In the common areas, such as when they have meetings, they must be able to go in the common areas so they can enjoy facilities.
Harry, what would be considered a reasonable request for accommodations?
Yes, a reasonable accommodations would be a change to the rules, to the policies, to the practices, and services, if necessary, for the disabled person to use the housing. For example, a building with a no pet policy must be allowed to a visually impaired tenant to keep a service animal in the unit to assist an individual, and therefore that service, that animal that is providing the service, that is a reasonable accommodation to allow it, and also to waive the fees as well that go along with that service.
And, I think about that's just the same way it is within restaurants. Even though dogs are not allowed, people with seeing problems can have that dog with them, or even some other type of disabilities. Those dogs are allowed into many areas, including grocery stores often, to help accommodate that person.
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
All right. Annie, does a housing provider have to grant reasonable accommodations even though they've been requested?
Well, it depends. Normally, but it depends on whether or not the disability there's a need for the accommodation, and it's disability related. If the accommodation would impose an undue burden or financial burden or administrative burden on the provider, they would not have to provide it.
Pat, what is considered a reasonable modification?
Well, where Whereas an accommodation is a change in a policy or a rule, a modification is a structural change. A disabled person makes a request for a reasonable modification so that they can fully enjoy their residence and all of the facilities attached to their residence. Then that would be a reasonable modification. Some examples are if someone wants to remove a cabinet under a bathroom sink so they make it easier to get closer to the sink, widen a doorway if they use a wheelchair, or install a ramp. Those are all structural changes. And some of the, sometimes the requirement will be when that individual who installed a modification moves out of the facility, it can be required, the person can be required to put the property back in its original condition prior to moving out.
And speaking of the modification, who absorbs the cost when it's first done?
Well, you know, that depends on the situation. It really does, because if a request for modification is reasonable and the resident is willing to pay for it, then it's something that should be granted. Normally, modifications are paid for by the individual requesting it. In some instances, if it's a building doesn't meet the legal requirements for new buildings, or if a facility receives public monies and the request being made is not an undue financial burden or administrative burden, the provider, the housing provider, can be required to pay for it. It really is a case-by-case basis.
Just a question. Would it behoove an apartment complex or condo unit to say they are disability accessible? Maybe point that out as a plus rather than as a negative?
Sure.
Yes, it would.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Let's move on to senior living, Annie, in particular. For example, some retirement communities advertise that applicants must be capable of independent living. Would this fall under Fair Housing Act?
Yes, it could. It would be illegal under the Act to place an ad that would suggest people with disabilities are unwelcome or would discourage them from applying to that facility. The term capable of independent living is very subjective, and people can define that as based on how they think, and it can seriously limit housing choices for seniors. And so, because sometimes people are seniors or people with disabilities may just need part-time assistance that the family members can perform or they can pay for themselves and be able to live independently. And for someone to, or a facility to discourage them or deny them access to that facility would be discriminatory.
Or there may be someone who doesn't drive and may have a family member or another type of provider who comes and helps them do that type of thing.
I mean, they may perceive them as being disabled in that situation, but in a lot of cases where people have wheelchairs or have certain types of disabilities, they are perfectly capable of taking care of themselves with some assistance from family members or paying for it on their own.
Have any of these examples ever been challenged in court?
Yes, they have. I have noticed some of those types for exactly today. For example, there was a senior community who had rental policies in which the housing provider made illegal inquiries about several of the residents and deemed them incapable of independent living, and they had to leave. That was challenged in court. The Justice Department brought a lawsuit challenging the practices of a senior apartment complex looking to change its image to an active senior facility or an independent living community that resulted in several residents being asked to leave on the basis of their wellness examinations. There was an administrative one where the complaint required the provider to establish new policies, recognizing the rights of seniors with disabilities to age in place and not have to leave because they reach a certain age or become more frail, and use the assistance of outside providers. And there was one that required applicants to undergo a medical assessment as a condition of admission to the facility, which resulted in a court entered consent order enjoining the practicing and awarding damages. So those are several of the cases that have been brought in court.
So once again, the housing folks need to think twice before
Yes, they do.
discriminate.
Yes, they do.
Harry, speaking of complaints, how long do people have to file?
File their complaint within 365 days in writing with all the information and the facts. The sooner the better.
Because the facts stay in your head a lot more. Or even
Definitely.
maybe perhaps writing things down as it happens so that you are prepared.
That's correct.
Okay. Pat, when going through an application process for senior living community, would an applicant be required to undergo a medical examination at all to be admitted?
Absolutely not. A senior living community cannot require an applicant to undergo a medical examination in order to be accepted to live there. An applicant doesn't need to sign a medical release form or provide medical records, and housing providers can't ask about the physical condition or what designed to test an applicant's physical stability or their mental capability. If an applicant is feeling pressured to provide that information, they should just tell the individual who's inquiring that they don't feel comfortable with that line of questioning because it's too personal.
Are there ever any exceptions?
Well, if you have a home that is designated for, or a facility that's designated for a specific disability, like they'll have homes where only people with AIDS will live or something like that, or where people with a disability are given a preference under the law, then you can ask enough information to determine if they are qualified or if to move into a particular facility. But you can only ask enough to make that determination. You can't go into great depths. Also, if you have an individual who is making a request for a reasonable accommodation or modification and their disability isn't apparent, then you can ask them to provide information so that you can determine that their request is related to a disability.
Right. And then we're going to wrap things up with you. Summarize some of the major points that housing providers of senior living communities, nursing homes, or other types of housings with services need to consider before denying admission or asking a resident to leave, because there's some important things to think about.
Yeah, I'll summarize a couple, or maybe three.
Okay.
In the senior living communities, they need to consider whether the resident is able to manage his or her own living arrangements with or without assistance, and otherwise comply with the non-discriminatory terms of the lease. If so, then the resident should not be denied admission or asked to leave based on his or her disability. In the nursing home setting, if the resident asks the nursing home or other housing providers or other housing service providers, if the resident asks the provider for a reasonable accommodation that's above, or asks for service that's above and beyond the normal services provided, and what they need to consider is whether or not the request can be reasonably accommodated. And if so, they should provide the request that has been made, and the resident should not be asked to leave the facility. And as we said earlier, in advertising for people to come to the facility, they should be very careful how they advertise. They should not do anything to discourage a person from applying or to make it appear that they have a motive for not wanting people to come to the facility, and they should be very careful about denying people services when their contract, in fact, provides for those services. So those are some of the things that they should be careful about.
Yes. Truth in advertising.
Yes.
Exactly. I'd like to thank all my guests again today for joining me. Dr. Harry Salinas, Commissioner with the Fairfax County Human Rights Commission, Annie Carroll, she's Division Director, Human Rights Division, and Patricia Stephan Fawcett, Housing Specialist with the Fairfax County Office of Human Rights and Equity Programs. Challenging housing discrimination can be done in various ways, depending on how you wish to proceed. You can file a complaint with the Fairfax County Human Rights Commission or file a lawsuit on your own. The Human Rights Commission receives and investigates complaints filed by any person who believes they've experienced housing discrimination in Fairfax County on the basis of race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, that's families with children, disability, elderliness, or marital status. In addition to housing, the Fairfax County Ordinance also protects against discrimination in employment, public accommodations, credit, and private education. For more information about protected classes covered, contact the Commission. If you feel you've been discriminated against, it's very important to file as soon as possible after the discrimination occurs. You must file a complaint with the Fairfax County Human Rights Commission in writing within 365 days after the alleged discriminatory housing practice occurred or terminated. There's no cost involved in filing with the Commission. If you choose not to file a complaint with the Human Rights Commission, you can file a lawsuit at your own expense in Federal District Court or Virginia State Court, but you must do so within 2 years of any alleged violation. For more information on fair housing rights, visit the Fairfax County Human Rights website or give them a call at 703-324-2953 or TTY at 703-324-2900. They can also be found online by visiting www.fairfaxcounty.gov/HRC. Seniors who need information about other programs and services provided by the county should contact the Department of Family Services Area Agency on Aging at 703-324-5411. Information is also available on the Fairfax County website. I'm Maggie Lenton. Thanks for tuning in.
From the beginning of time, people have struggled to find better ways to communicate important information with their community. Some ways worked better than others.
Well, times have changed, and now Fairfax County offers the ultimate one-stop shop to get what's important to you and your community in Fairfax.
Get news. Get information.
Get Fairfax County.
I get Fairfax County. I call 703-FAIRFAX to find out how to get an absentee ballot.
I get Fairfax County at work. A traffic advisory text message allowed me to avoid a delay on my commute home.
I get Fairfax County on my iPod. I was able to download an interview with my favorite author, R.L. Stein.
An e-services online forum helped me find my lost dog at an animal shelter.
Get Fairfax County. It's free. Keeping current has never been easier.
You can help bring back millions of dollars to you, your family, and your neighbors, and it takes about 10 minutes. Fill out and mail back your U.S. Census form by April 1st so Fairfax County can get its fair share of federal money for essential services like schools, roads, clinics, senior centers, and more. Based on census data, the county got more than $359 million for services last year. That's $943 for each household in the county. Census forms will be mailed in March, so be sure to send it back by April 1st.
Hey, dog owners, when you take me for a walk, it's important for you to stop and clean up after me and put it in the trash can. When it rains, all my poop is washed into the nearby storm drain and then into the streams.
I live in the stream with fish and other animals. Dog poop makes my friends and me sick.
Not picking up my poop is harmful to all the fish and other animals that live in the stream.
Keep the streams clean. People use them too. Remember, only rain down the storm drain.
Photographs of your treasured memories should be enjoyed and shared, but they can't be if they're shoved in drawers and shoeboxes. Learn how to create a scrapbook with your memories and allow the story behind your photos to be told. Hi, welcome to Park Takes. I'm Cheryl Lafferty, and I'm here with Kelly Garcia, scrapbooking instructor at Lake Akatank. So let's first start with the class. Kelly, what do you teach your students?
I teach them how to put their photos in a photo-safe album. I teach them how to crop their photos, which means to cut their photos. I teach them to mat the photos and put the photos in a layout. I also teach sticker borders, sticker clusters, and a variety of punches.
Do you need any special tools or equipment for the class?
I provide everything the students will need for the class. I only ask that they bring 8 to 10 photos and their imagination.
So what's the difference between scrapbooking and me just putting a photo in an album?
With scrapbooking, you're putting the photos in a scrapbook and you're writing down the story and the history behind the photos. Where in a regular photo album, you're just sticking the photos in, and the majority of the time they're not photo safe, which means over a period of time they'll fade and be destroyed.
I'm curious, what got you into scrapbooking?
I took a class in 1997. Didn't think I would ever want to do scrapbooking. And a few days later, I found a box of photos of my grandmother who had passed away in 1996 and realized I didn't have any history written down about my grandmother and didn't know anything about the photos. So right then and there, I decided to put photos in an album, and I've been doing it ever since.
And now you have a pictorial history of your grandma. If you'd like to learn more about scrapbooking or any other class offering, give us a call at 703-222-4664 or watch for your Park Takes magazine that's mailed quarterly. Okay, Kelly, I've got a photo here, and I'm going to put it in this thing as a cropper, right? So I line it up like that and push this down. Easy!
Children see the world's wonder before they see its danger, often through a window. Windows let in views, sunlight, and breezes, but may also pose a safety threat. Every year, the Regional Trauma Center treats many children who fall from windows, and the number is escalating. Don't leave children alone. Injuries can happen in seconds. Keep children away from open windows, especially windows close to the floor. An opening as little as 4 inches may be large enough for a toddler to fall through. Keep furniture, beds, toy chests, and other items of children's interest away from windows. If you must open a window, open it from the top. Window screens are designed to keep insects out, but will not keep children in. Pressure of 1 pound or less may cause a screen to fall out, and a child with it. Most window falls occur during the spring and autumn. 3/4 of the children who fall are 4 years old or less. 1/3 are admitted directly to the pediatric intensive care unit. The Fairfax County Fire and Rescue Department wants you to help us battle the dramatic increase in the number of toddlers injured as a result of falls from windows. For more information regarding window safety, please contact Public Affairs and Life Safety Education at 703-246-3801 or visit fairfaxcounty.gov/fire.
Today, it's business as usual. But if there were a natural disaster or terrorist attack, would you be ready? Have you talked with your family about how you would stay in touch if you were separated, couldn't call? Have you read the emergency instructions posted in our buses, trains, and terminals? The best time to think about an emergency is before one happens. Planning can make a difference. Go to makeaplan.org for the simple steps you can take now to keep your family safer.